In this lecture, we are going to examine properties in C#, and then once we build some properties, we're going to set it to certain values and pass the object to the constructor of our controller. So what is a property? A property is a member that provides a flexible mechanism to read, write, and compute values of a private field. Properties can be used as if they are public data members, but they are actually special methods called accessors. This enables data to be accessed easily and still helps promote safety and flexibility of methods. As you can see right here, you can come down to where I have properties commented, and what you can do in Visual Studio is type prop, tab. And what we have here is our property. It gives us our type, which is an int. It gives us how accessible this type is. So this is public. When it's set to public, which we will discuss in future tutorials, it's allowed to be accessed outside of this class and outside of this assembly. So right here, putting it public makes my property available to any other class that utilizes the first class namespace. So right here I have public int my property. Let's just say my int. And then let's come down here, let's type prop. And let's make a string. And let's type here my string. And then let's go ahead and let's type prop again. And let's put a double. And let's just put here my double. So now these different properties are associated inside of my first class file. Now what else I can do is I have a constructor right here that doesn't pass any values to it. I can always set it inside of my constructor, or what I can do is I can create a separate constructor and say here. And what I can do is I can pass parameters for each one of these property types. Remember that the data types have to match. So what we can do here is put int my int, and then we could say string my string. And then we can also come in here and say double my double. And what we can do from that is we can say my int equals my int. What we're doing is we're passing these local parameters associated with our first class constructor, and we're setting those local parameters to our global properties right here, my int, my string, and my double. Notice that when they're being set, the data types must match. So I have my int right there. And then I also have my string equals my property up here. And then we'll set the last one, my double, equal to my double. Now you can see my first class file has two constructors associated with this class. I have the first class associated here as my first one, and then I have a second constructor that passes 3 local parameters and sets that to the global properties. So now that I have my properties set there, I can access these outside of my class. So what we'll do is go to our C# controller. And one thing now we can do is that we have this initiation here. We can always pass here, if we change this first class, we can actually pass parameters to this. There's 2 initiations of this constructor. As you can see right here, you can initiate it with the first constructor that passes no parameters, or you can initiate it as the second constructor that passes 3 parameters that set it to the global properties. So once we have that there, we have an initiation of our object. What you'll typically do in your controller class is to set its own constructor and pass those objects to associate with that constructor. Now, of course, I could leave it like this with first class, my object equals new first class. But what I can do is I can pass it as a parameter and set it to the global object. So what I'll do, similar to what I did in my own constructor over there, is I'll type public, C#. So I'm setting a constructor associated with C# controller. The only way I'm able to do this is that I've had the dependency injection to associate in my application. As we stated before, if we go to our project.json, we have associated in this application dependency injection. Dependency injection is a big component for ASP.NET Core. Everything is a dependency injection. As you can see in our startup.cs, what do we utilize here? We have a configure services that's injecting the application insights telemetry and also MVC. And once we inject that service, we can configure our middleware to associate the routing. So this is all dependency injection. Similar to what we're doing here, we can pass a local parameter here and say first class a object. We're going to utilize this later when we touch base into Entity Framework. So right there, I've set a parameter of first class, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to say a object is equal to my object. So now this is associated in our C# controller. This is typically how you set up your class files to associate any object that you want to implement inside of your other methods associated with your controllers. So dependency injection is very important when you implement all of your custom classes and you want to inject them into the controller and then associate that into your views. So now once I have that set, what I can do is, since I already have an object set there, I can say my object dot. And you can see right here, I have all those different properties associated with my first class. So right here, I have my double, my int, and my string. So I'm going to go to my double, and then I'm going to set this value to 12.95. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to set my object, and then I'm going to set this to first string. Once I have that set, then I'm going to type my object dot my int, and I'm going to set this to 12. So now I have my 3 different objects to associate in my application. Now what I can do, of course, is I could concatenate these and pass these into my view, pass them into a local variable, or what I can do directly is inject this into my view to associate right here, passing that back into my view that I associate on the C# controller and on the index.cs HTML page right here. So this is how I would implement that logic to associate with the C# controller. So we've implemented our first class, we've initiated an object, we've created a constructor on our C# controller, passing a parameter of first class a object, setting a object to my object set initiated at the top of my constructor. And then what I did is in my index view, I pass my object, my double equals a certain value, and I've set these properties to different values to associate with their data types. I also created in my first class a separate constructor that passes local parameters to my global properties that I set, so that anytime I implement the first class object and pass these, we can reuse those values and associate them directly once my constructor is initiated and once I have an object associated with my class. So remember that this is typically how you'll implement your logic when you inject different items into your controllers. Like I stated before, in future tutorials, when we start utilizing our Entity Framework data context, we will inject that into our controllers, set it inside of the constructor, and pass that context into different methods so we can associate our HTTP request, pass that data back to the view. I want to thank you for joining me in this lecture. Have a nice day.